Also, we're still logging on.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was having a chat with Stuart. I think we might have to stick with.
Yeah, and that's fine.
Yep.
I'm just saying that when I'm talking to Bill,
Yep.
what's happening is that when he responds, hey Bill, can you hear me, Bill?
Yeah, I can hear you, Alf. My screen's just gone blank, so we'll have to reset. Hang on. Right, can you hear me, Alf? Can you hear me, Alf?
Yeah, I'm just testing the computer. I'm just trying to test the computer. Because
Okay, sorry. Eddie, can you leave us last? Leave us last when you go out. I'm just going to fix this. Hello? Can you hear me? If you talk. Yeah.
How many participants do you have?
Kia ora koutou, talofa lava, kia ora ana, and good evening. Welcome to our 6th Emergency Budget webinar. The emergency budget responds to the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on Te Kaunihera o Tāmaki Makaurau Auckland Council's finances, given the projected $525 million drop in non-rates revenue in the coming financial year. Tonight's webinar is an opportunity for you to hear your elected members engage in conversation and dialogue about a crisis that cannot be responded to in a business as usual kind of way. It's also an opportunity for you to send through your questions you'd like answered, both about the future of Tāmaki Makaurau or feedback and comments about the essential services that Aucklanders need. It's also an opportunity for you to ask elected members what building for the future looks like. The webinar this evening is designed to help inform your submission and assist the elected members in their deliberations. If you've not already done so, please ensure you make a submission at akhaveyoursay.nz/emergency-budget. I encourage you to keep sharing the link with your family, colleagues and friends. We've had an amazing response and want to ensure that we've heard from as many of you as possible. On tonight's panel, we have Councillor and Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore of Franklin Ward. As always, Bill, thanks for your time. Great to have you join tonight's panel. Councillor Angela Dalton, Manurewa Papakura Ward. Councillor Dalton is also the Council's Maori Outcomes Portfolio holder. Kia ora to you this evening. Councillors Al Filipaina and Whanana, Councillor Efeso Collins from the Manukau Ward. Whaatalofa atu I lua susunga po lua whionga fo'i I le nei awhiawhi. Councillor Josephine Bartley, Manukau, Maunga Kiki, I beg your pardon, Tāmaki Ward, Malo le soifua maua Josephine. We are also joined by Andrew Duncan and David Gurney from our Finance Department. Tēnā kōrua, I tēnei pō. I'm Eddie Tuiavi'i and it is my pleasure to be your facilitator, aka mover along of conversation this evening. Our session this evening will last essentially about 90 minutes. It'll be recorded and made available on the website alongside questions and responses. Just a heads up, if you've posed a question and it's not addressed tonight, we'll endeavour to have a response for your question as soon as possible and it'll be posted and made available on our website. Do express your views in order to ensure you have all the necessary information to make an informed submission, but please bear in mind that this evening's webinar is not about reaching consensus. Before we kick off with a presentation from our subject matter experts, Councillor Cashmore, as usual, I've sort of taken the time to peruse Facebook and have a look at some of the commentary that's coming through. And one that I picked up over the weekend essentially spoke about all the roadworks that have commenced around inner city projects and suburban towns. And the comment was really around how they're decimating so many businesses. And I appreciate the validity of this question, given that we're looking at sort of the economic recovery, if you like, of Tāmaki Makaurau. So the question essentially, Councillor Cashmore, is must these things all happen at once?
Kia ora everybody, good evening, and thanks for the question, Eddie. It's a challenging one, isn't it? Because no matter what you do in the sphere of transformation, you actually put cones out, you change the way people can walk and actively go to places of commerce. So it's a challenge, and it's one that we try and minimise the impact as much as we possibly can, but there always will be an impact. The key point is to have the impact as short as possible time frame, as is feasibly possible, giving in mind the type of the project that's been done, to advertise the business, which AT often does, or AT'd, or do it combined to promote visitation. The other point is going ahead. The businesses will be in a better place because there will be more activation and better infrastructure around for them to utilise to bring people to their door. But there is an impact, and it is the cost of progress, sadly.
Thank you, Councillor Cashmore. I've got another question here that was sent through to us over the week, and I wondered if you could offer up some comments on that. Has expenditure spent through AT'd actually been shown to be financially positive? And then there's a question there on the end, could AT be scrapped in total? Some comments from you, please, Councillor.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. A very good question. One I used to think was a logical and sensible question before I became a politician, a few years back. And my answer is very simply this. Although you're looking at the service, I think ATEED is there to promote tourism, which is going to be dead for a few years, but will come back, and to promote events, which is really critical for making the city a vibrant and wonderful place to visit. And you think of the festivals that happen in Auckland, you know, Diwali, Lantern Festival, Pacifica, all of these things that we've lost in this past year, but they will come back, and ATEED helps deliver those events. And also the small events that's in local communities. But another key component is ATEED's about economic development. And if you think of the work they've done in the film industry, which has been world leading for this country, you know, they have brought Avatar to New Zealand and to Auckland. They have promoted a film industry in Auckland that was barely $500,000. It's now in excess of $2 billion a year worth to the city, and it employs thousands of people. And it is an industry that is growing rapidly in this country and in Auckland in particular. So do they have a value? Yes, they do. And the value is actually recognised not only by Auckland Council, but by central government and by the private sector as well. ATEED put together programs and groupings of people involved in the film industry or in the tourism industry or in the events industry, and they actually coordinate, facilitate, collaborate with the group to get them to conjointly deliver better outcomes for the city, the country, but also for those individual businesses. So it's a well sought after business. It's been reshaped by Mark Franklin, chairman of the board, and Nick Hill, the CEO, into a model that's now probably far more fleet of foot and delivering better for Auckland than we've ever seen in the past. It's always been valuable, but it's now got a new sense of worth to the city, especially in these times that are so challenging. Thanks, Eddie.
Whaftai, thank you, Councillor Cashmore. This webinar, it's got a focus on South Auckland, hence our panellists this evening, but obviously don't feel restrained or restricted to asking questions that just focus on the South Auckland catchment or region. In saying that though, on our panel tonight we have Councillor Dalton, who I've mentioned some of her portfolio responsibilities. Councillor Dalton, there's a comment here or a question, and the comment is around the mention of Maori Development in the consultation document. The question here is, does Council actually fund Maori Development? If so, why so? If not, why not?
Thanks for the question, Eddie. Yes, Council does support our marae with development, and we do that through grants and through programs. And we do that because tangata whenua are a priority for us. And I believe that Council has a role in helping deliver on outcomes for Māori, and that is through our programs, support in marae, and grants to enable and empower mana whenua, urban Māori, Matawaka, to deliver on things that are important to Māori in Auckland.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dalton. What I might do now, because I'm noticing that some of these questions are either frequently asked questions or they're questions that might potentially be answered during the subject matter expert presentation. I'd now like to invite you to turn your attention to Andrew Duncan and our team from Finance, who will make a brief presentation or a presentation on the emergency budget. Thank you, Andrew and David.
Good evening. We consulted with you in February this year on a business as usual budget when COVID-19 was out of sight over the horizon. Since that time, the world, New Zealand, Auckland and the Council have been hit by the health and economic impacts of the pandemic. It's completely unexpected consequences for businesses and residents of our city and for ourselves. The impacts are unprecedented. We're facing a reduction of over $500 million in our non-rates revenue. Our emergency budget that we're going to talk with you about today shows how we're proposing to deal with those impacts, and we're looking to get your feedback on that. So we're fortunate to start from a strong financial position, and our responsibility as a council on behalf of the city is to deliver a financially prudent and sustainable budget. Like any household, in doing that, we've got to think about ensuring that our revenue covers our day-to-day expenses. And looking at the budget, we've got a responsibility to ensure that we can continue to deliver the essential services that are the foundation for modern urban living. while recognising the impact that our requirement for rates places on ratepayers, many of whom may be struggling financially, and at the same time looking to support and stimulate the recovery of the city's economy and the businesses and residents that make it up. And with those goals in mind, the council's got 5 levers that it can pull to adjust our budget in response to the economic impact. We can look at borrowing more, we can defer capital expenditure, cut our costs, sell some assets, and look at the level of rates increase we asked ratepayers to contribute to the city. So, first thing to look at is our levels of borrowing. Now, unlike central government, we're constrained in how much we borrow. So we can't take on the same sort of role that they can in supporting the economy and recovery. We've invested very heavily in recent years to address historic underinvestment in the city's assets and to manage the impacts of growth. So putting in new infrastructure to support new residents and to maintain and improve the services we provide to all residents existing and new in the city. But this has taken us close to the limits of what we can borrow. So like anyone looking to get a mortgage, we've got to reassure the lenders they've got to be comfortable that we're going to be able to meet our payments. Because we're close to our limits, we don't want to borrow too much more because that would affect the interest rates that we pay, and it might also affect our ability to raise more debt in the event that we face further shocks. So we're fortunate to have an AA credit rating. The council would like to keep that because of the benefits that provides to the city in terms of lower interest rates and access to credit. Now in the short term, because of the unexpected nature of the shock and the scale, we are proposing to go slightly above our own self-imposed limits, but that'll only be for a year and it'll help us manage the short-term impacts, and we're not going to be going over it by very much. We can also look at deferring some of our capital expenditure. It'll take pressure off our need to borrow and raise revenue. So that could mean reducing the amount we spend on buildings, community facilities, new roads and pathways, and infrastructure like new water pipes. We're still proposing to have quite a major capital investment in the city, but less than we'd planned, which means we'll be putting off some projects that we previously wanted to do to meet the needs of the city's residents. And like a household, that's putting off buying that new fridge and keeping the old one for a bit longer. Similarly, we can look at saving costs, at reducing our day-to-day expenditure. We're starting by looking at $120 million of savings, and that'll be done through voluntary reductions in staff pay, looking at some savings in interest payments. We will have to let some staff go. We can look at reducing corporate property maintenance, renewals and utility costs. And that'll also be alongside some temporary service level reductions. I think someone's already asked a question about the opening hours for libraries, for example, and that might be something that has to be looked at a little bit as well. We can also look at asset sales. So we've got a very large portfolio of assets, but not all of them are heavily used or in demand from the community. So if we sell some of these, it allows us to maintain our capital investment, more of our capital investment program. So we can invest in assets that will get more used or will deliver better and a higher level of outcome for the community. The last two things that we can look at are the level of rates increase. So we've proposed 2 levels of rates increase, 3.5% and 2.5%. Now the 3.5% is the level of rates increase that we proposed to you back in February. This is no longer going to be able to deliver the level of services and asset investment that we'd planned at that time because of the reduction of 500 million, over 500 million in our other revenue, our non-rates revenue. That, just to remind you, that non-rates revenue is things like passenger transport fares, people using our facilities, and a range of other areas. So at the 3.5% increase, we'll be reducing our capital investment program by 280 million. We've still got a big program at 2.3 billion, but we'll have to take 280 million of projects out and push them out into future years. In doing that, we've focused on keeping as many of the projects that are most likely to stimulate the economy, to have the most flow-on effects in terms of jobs and growth. We'll also have to make another $54 million of reductions in our expenditure on top of the 120 million I referred to enable us to stay within our, to say, prudently managing our budgets. And this will mean that there'll be some noticeable changes to service levels. 3.5% rates increase would mean for the average value residential property in Auckland an extra $1.82 a week, or $95 a year in rates. If we go with a 2.5% rates increase, we'd have to pull another 65 million out of our capital program and push that out into the future, make a further $21 million of savings, taking the total savings to 195 million. And this is a more austere approach, and there'll be more significant and material effects on some of the services you're used to getting from the council. 2.5% rates increase is $1.35 a week for the average residential property, or $70 a year. And the difference between the two options is about 47 cents a week. So we're looking for your feedback on those two options. And that's the main question that we're consulting with you on. We've also got two other things we're consulting with you on. The first of these is a new rates postponement policy. Now, the council recognised in May this year that as a result of the lockdown, many ratepayers, business and residential, might struggle to meet the fourth quarter rates instalment. So the council's allowed ratepayers who are struggling financially to defer the payment of their fourth quarter instalment until August in the coming financial year. So that's the August 2020. But this is only a temporary respite, and we recognise that many ratepayers may still be struggling financially when it comes time to pay the rates for next year. So we're proposing a new rates postponement policy that would allow ratepayers who with financial difficulties to defer up to 20,000 of their rates per property for the 2021 year, to put paying that off for a year, and then to have a further year to pay it back, so they don't have to pay it back in a lump sum. You'd also be able to add in up to 5,000 of any rates deferred from the fourth quarter. And this is focused on providing help to small and medium-sized businesses and residential ratepayers. It would mean, while we'll still get that revenue, we won't be getting it next year, and we estimate that could be up to $65 million, which puts a bit more pressure on us in terms of less revenue coming in immediately to provide services or to undertake capital investments. So we're interested to get your views on that proposal. The third question we have is about our proposal to suspend the accommodation provider targeted rate. Now, we charge this rate to hotels, motels and Airbnb type properties, and it helps us fund half of the expenditure we undertake on major events and visitor attraction. Now, with the effects of the border closure on tourism and international students, we're reducing our spending by about $10 million in this space, and as a result, because we're not going to get the outcomes we'd be looking for while the borders are closed, and the rate that funds it, we're proposing to reduce that by 3/4 as well. And in addition, because of the likely timeframes for when the spending may have an impact, and we believe this spending, as Councillor Cashmore said earlier, will be important for reinvigorating and revitalising the tourism industry when our borders can open in the future. But that's not going to be till later to the middle of next year, hopefully by that time. So we're not actually going to charge the rate until that time. So we're cutting the spending by 3/4, cutting the rate by 3/4, and we're only going to charge those properties the rate during the 4th quarter of next year. That's our 3rd question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew, this evening. I've noticed that there are quite a few questions that have come through, which is great, but just in case you might have missed the queue, now is absolutely the opportunity to fire through questions that you've got top of mind or things that you might be wrestling with that you'd like a comment from either the subject matter experts or our elected members this evening. There's a question here, and I'm going to direct this to our councillors from the Manukau ward. The question is essentially around the Otahuhu main street, which hasn't been updated for decades potentially. And so there's a comment here whether that's potentially going to be affected at all by this budget, or whether you want to hear from them. I noticed that our subject matter expert has provided a comment here, which I'll read before turning it over to Councillors Collins and Filipaina. And the comment here is, looking at the material provided by Panuku, it doesn't seem that the work in Otahuhu is being delayed, but work in Manukau are being deferred, which is on page 37 of the supporting information. Councillors Collins or Filipaina, is there a comment about the main road or the main street update in Otahuhu, please?
My humble apologies for the delay. But as you could see on page 18 of the consultation document, there is a possibility that the Otahuhu town centre upgrade there may be deferred, and that's on page 18. So look, I think it's clear for everybody to know that everything that's been put in that document is there, and that no confirmation of any of the proposed cuts would end up happening until we end up getting all the consultations. So again, page 18, just down the bottom, it's got forward to 2020 projects that will be deferred include, and one of them is the Otahuhu town centre. But again, it's up to our community in Otahuhu to end up putting in their submission to this emergency budget. So, you know, everything's just been put on the table, but nothing is going to be confirmed until we get consultation back. So that's my little sixpence in regards to that one.
After Councillor Filipaina, and again off the back of that call to action, AK have your say /emergency-budget. To our subject matter experts, I've got a question here. The question states, I believe that the budget deliberations start with a council tenure plan and budget. Why are there target increases of 2.5 or 3.5% from this plan rather than a budget based on actual requirements in this emergency period? Is there a comment from you, or is that a Councillor Cashmore question?
Budget is based on the actual requirements in the emergency period. Council has looked at what it needs to do to continue to deliver the services the community expects from us. But there are some choices to be made about where any adjustments to those service levels should take place to enable us to have a prudent budget, and that's what we're looking to get your feedback on.
Thank you, Andrew. While we're at it, I've got a question that's come through over the weekend. It's a question on accounting policy. Depreciation, as far as I can see, is actually not set aside in a reserve fund for the upkeep or replacement of assets. Should depreciation actually be counted into operating expenditure when it is in fact simply an accounting entity affecting asset value? Andrew.
It's important that we keep a track of depreciation and account for it, so that the council is making provision over time to replace the assets that it's purchased on the behalf of the residents of the city, and can ensure that it's able to replace those and upgrade them as they age. So this is more than just an accounting entry. It's good, prudent management of the assets we hold on behalf of the residents of the city.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm going to give David Gurney an opportunity. I see that he's responded to a lot of great questions on here. If you just sort of wanted to take a moment and select some of the ones you might want to speak to, David. And while you're preparing that, I've got a question for, I'll start with Councillor Dalton, then I'll go to Councillor Filipaina. You know, if you think about the submissions process, it's that spectrum of civic participation, is it not? You know, we've got submissions, we've got voter turnout, we've got all these things in between. And I guess the open-ended question is, why is it important for you to hear from our community? I mean, is it important? Will you read the submissions? Councillor Dalton, I'll start with you.
Thanks for the question, Eddie. Absolutely, but there's thousands and thousands that have come in this time. But I can speak to my experience as a local board chair for so many years. Those submissions were read, and in fact, those submissions influenced the local board members and the decisions that they made for their community. And I know that my colleagues that I work alongside now at Council will be looking closely at this information, because it is so important. And the differences between the rates and the services and what's on offer is absolutely critical for Auckland. And we need to make the best decision we can, but it's so important that I, for one, understand what it is that is important to you. So yes, I will be looking at the submissions that come back. Thanks, Eddie.
Thank you, Councillor Dalton. Councillor Filipaina, you've heard Councillor Dalton's comments this evening, and it was a question that was raised at the end last week, actually. And does it matter that people put submissions in or not? I mean, haven't the governing body sort of decided which way they're going to go? Is this true and accurate, Councillor, or do we generally want to hear from our community?
I think you've answered the question yourself, because we do want to hear from them. And no decisions have been made. I mean, I've been a councillor for 17 years and always believed that, one, we shouldn't go into any consultation with a firm idea as to what's going to happen. That's not fair on our community, and it's also not fair on elected members, and also His Worship the Mayor. So definitely not around having any preconceived ideas as to the questions that have been posed, that we have confirmed that this is where we're going to go. So no, we haven't. Yes, it is so important for our community to end up putting a submission.
Whaftai, Councillor Filipaina. Come back now to our subject matter expert, David Gurney, if you just want to give some of those questions some attention, and then we'll move on this evening. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Eddie. So there are a couple of questions that I'll answer. So the first question was around the central interceptor and whether investment in the central interceptor will be delayed in the emergency budget. In actual fact, the central interceptor is a core piece of infrastructure, and so it will continue. And in actual fact, there is a slight increase in the expenditure that we'll be spending on it. So we originally projected to spend $189 million, and in this budget, there's $197 million proposed for next year. Overall, in terms of water care's infrastructure budget, there's $513 million of investment being planned. So that's still a focus on delivering core infrastructure for Auckland. The other question I wanted to answer was around, are there going to be any savings coming out of us not having as many events in Auckland? So we would be definitely having less events across Auckland, and this is hitting actually our regional facilities, Auckland CCO, the most. We're expecting our revenue to be $40 million down because of less revenue, less events in the city. And of course, we will try and cut our cloth to fit, so there will be savings. Examples of savings, for example, there will be $60 million worth of savings at RFA. We won't be holding as many events, so there won't be as many costs that RFA will incur. RFA is also going to be looking at $6 million worth of savings through through holding vacant positions and deferring salary increases, as well as another at $5.8 million savings just through lower staff costs and discretionary spending reduction. So that's quite major. The other major reduction is $10 million from ATEED in reducing promotion of Auckland as an international destination. The borders will be closed, and so therefore we are delaying any kind of major spending and promoting us as an international destination. That spending is funded by the accommodation provider targeted rate, and so we are also consulting on not charging that rate, accommodation providers such as hotels and motels, until March next year. So we are proposing to defer charging that rate until then. Thanks, Eddie.
Thank you, David. Councillor Cashmore, I've got a question here for you, and the question asks, given the demonstrated ability of significant numbers of managerial and clerical staff to work from home, and I'm assuming this is off of the back of the lockdown, the question then asks, can savings be made in floor space for council offices? Please, Councillor Cashmore.
Thanks very much for the question. And it's a good one because it's something one of the first things I asked when I went back is that, you know, a third potentially of our council staff are currently working from home. And we have a corporate policy about provision of buildings and space for staff to work from. So right at this moment, my General called Mr. Abbott is working through that about, okay, what is going to be the required amount of space we're going to need in the future? Is a third or more of our staff being able to work at home still productive, still useful, still doing what they need to do? That can lead to very real savings and a rise in the quality of life for those staffs, less commuting time and less emissions from carbon because of less transportation. There's a lot of positives. It's new days yet, and also seeing, I think, a change, Eddie, in the way the whole city operates. We are seeing already have two big companies who are going to be shutting down their central Auckland businesses and moving out, accounting for more people to work from home, and it'll have more sub-regional offices out in the suburbs. There might be a Manukau, they might be in Pukekohe, they might be in Albany. And that's also a positive move, in my opinion, that we actually have a disbursement of financial activity going on from the CBD going into other areas to help them become more invigorated. So yes, I think it's a watch this space, because I don't have the answer for you right now, but if we do stick with a third and that comes out to be a reality, there will be a financial saving for council. Yes, most certainly.
Thank you, Councillor Cashmore. We've got a follow-up question here, and I recall that last week I asked the question that a listener or a viewer posed about, you know, why don't we just pull the plug on some of these things and just pick them up when we come back to them. This question potentially asks it from a different angle, and the question is, how can the council ensure that we don't take any costly steps backwards if cutting things like pest, plant, animal control, or cutting preventative maintenance on infrastructure? Won't it be more expensive in the long run? And I appreciate that this is all part of your deliberations, right, between a rock and a hard space. But is there a comment to be made there, Councillor Cashmore, about how does the council ensure we don't take costly steps backwards?
I think I read that question earlier on. I think it's an excellent question, Eddie, because it's a very real point. You know, if you delay an infrastructure project, it comes with real carry costs. You've got to protect it. You've got to look after exposed steel. You've got to still have security around it. And then when you start to uplift that project again in a year or two times hence, there's a real startup cost that is it is absolutely real. So the same thing happens for the environment or for things like our car fleet. So nothing gets stopped. I think we're not using the words cessation. We're using the words, okay, things will be deferred. And the other areas, so for the environment targeted rate and the water quality targeted rate, those are by legislation have to deliver into those areas for which that targeted rate is taken from. So those works carry on, whereas 100%, a project is 100% funded by a targeted rate, it carries on. If it's conjointly funded by some other council sources of income and a targeted rate augments it, then there might be some deferral or some changing to that policy. I don't think no one thing is going to be completely stopped. There will still be pest destruction. There will still be planting going on. It just won't be at the same levels that we've used to had in the past. It's the same with the capital projects, Eddie. You know, we had a capital budget last year of around $2.3 billion. We're planning on a capital budget this year of 2.2 or 2.3 with the COVID influence. We were going to do 2.6. And the other big thing now is with the capital budgets, council's delivering in the high 90% of its capital budget compared to the 70% as was historically the norm 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. So there's still a lot going to be happening, just not as much as we would have liked. And COVID is the reason for that.
Thank you, Councillor Cashmore. I'm just checking in on Councillor Filipina. We had some issues before, and if he's ready, there's a question here, Councillor Filipina, which I believe you might have a response to, or was that just a comment in general?
This particular comment I made is in regards to our regional events, because at the moment we could actually end up losing the $200,000 that the governing body approved to go to our regional events, which helped Korea Day, Japan Day, and even Taiwan. You know, it's those events that could be affected. That's why it's so important to end up again submitting, because what David mentioned around our CCO, that is different to the regional budget that I've just referred to. So, you know, that it is important, because I know that events have always been those in the top 3 that our community always look for around getting all our groups together, the international festival, for example. So that's why it's so important.
After Councillor Filipina. Whanana, Councillor Collins. You and Councillor Filipina are the ward councillors for one of the most diverse wards in Tamaki Makaurau, both in terms of the cultural makeup, but also in terms of the age demographic. I'm thinking now about rangatira and our young people, Councillor Collins. What's the significance of them having a say in this budget? Do the elected members want to hear from our young people? Some comments from you, Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Eddie, for the question. I think we're fortunate that Manukau has the youngest populace in the city, and so Councillor Filipina and myself represent the under 18-year-olds. But I think what's really important is that the reason why we want them to participate is because so many of these decisions have an impact on them. If you consider that in the next 10, 15, 20 years, many of them will be owning homes themselves or renting themselves, it means that they're going to be shouldering a lot of the burden of rates. So that's one thing to consider. So it's important that we encourage them to engage in this process now. Often we don't get a lot of feedback from young people, and one of the reasons why we've tried our best to make these engagement processes as widespread as possible, as accessible as possible, is to ensure that we have a range of people participating. And so many people may have been used previously to hearings, the hearings process. When I first became chair of a local board, we used to have a hearings process, but it's important that we not just have that process. We've got what are we calling this, a webinar going on now, Skype meetings, we've had community meetings previously. So that's our way to reach into those communities. And I think it's important also that we have the Auckland plan, the young person's plan, I Am Auckland, and it's important that they feel that they are an integral part of this city. We've got a very young population in Auckland. We're a super diverse city, and so we've got to understand that different people bring different experiences which make up the melting pot that is Auckland. So that's why we're encouraging as many people as possible to participate. I think this is a good forum because it's one where people can participate just by watching, or they can ask a question through the thread. They don't actually have to come and sit in front of people. And as people grow in their confidence, they're going to participate more. So this is why we're so keen to see a diverse level of participation. I think some other things that's worth considering is for a long time, a lot of our work has been done in English. And whilst English is one form of communication and engagement, a medium of instruction, it's also important that we understand that there are many who are multi-language, who speak multiple languages, and those whose English is not their first language. So it's important that those people feel like they can participate using the language that they're most competent in. So I think those are some of the key reasons, and we'd love to hear from more and more young people.
Whaftai whanana, Councillor Collins. I have a comment from Councillor Bartley.
Oh, talofa, thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to add some thoughts to the conversation regarding why it's important for communities to submit on the budget. Normally, people find budgets really boring and they don't really engage in council processes. But in this particular instance, with this emergency budget, it is vital that communities submit because the consequences will affect you on a day-to-day basis. It will affect your daily life, and you may not know it now, but you will know it once changes happen. For instance, your library may be open shorter hours, or it may be closed if it's not used that much. The pools that you swim in may be affected. You may live in an area which has got a lot of growth happening, a lot of construction, and some of the projects to help get your area ready for all these people moving in may be put off. So it is really important for people to take notice of this budget and to actually submit on it. So yeah, very, very, very important. It affects everybody on in their daily lives, and the more people know that, the better it will be for them to get involved and submit on this budget. Thank you.
Whaftai, Councillor Bartley. I've got a comment from Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, Edie. And just in support of Councillors Collins and Bartley, if people have a look at the documentation and they have a look at pages 16 and 17, it says quite clearly there some of the things that will be affected. And I've seen a question around local board grants. Well, the local boards are absolutely critical to be able to reach our people in our communities. And they do that through programs, they do that through grants, they do that through investing in playgrounds. Now, there will be local boards out there that are funding their youth councils, and there'll be local boards out there that are funding activities for our seniors, and for lots of groups just to care for our vulnerable people. So I think it's really important to understand that the local board budgets, there's a proposal to cut their budgets, and this will directly impact on funding and events. And events are so important to bring us together as community. This is what local boards do really, really well. So if you have the document, if you can look online for on the consultation document, pages 16 and 17 give you an idea of the likely things that might happen under a 3.5 or a 2.5% rate increase. These are the things that we would like to hear from you. What's your bottom line? What won't you accept as a compromise in this emergency budget? Thank you, Eddie.
Thank you, Councillor Dalton. I've got a question here for Councillor Cashmore before handing over to Councillor Filipaina, our subject matter experts. There's a question in here. Councillor Cashmore, can we get an update on the review of the CCAs launched last year? The question was wondering what happened to the public consultation part of that review. It would seem especially pertinent to the budget discussion to have some initial outcomes delivered. Where are we at with that, Councillor Cashmore?
Yes, thanks, Eddie. A really good question. Again, the CCO review is reporting back in July, and we will then be able to consult on any significant changes through the long-term planning process as we have to under the law. There might be some small things that happen through that review process, some accountability measures, or there might be some really large, complete wholesale changes. If they are large wholesale changes that have budgetary impacts, then we will most certainly have to consult, and that would be, I would imagine, as part of the LTP process, because we are drawing to a conclusion this annual plan, this emergency consultation process. So it would be a process for next year. But there might be some change that we will be able to push through that will have instantaneous or very quick benefit for council that aren't materially significant financially, or severely detrimental in any way or the other. So it's about, some things we'll be able to do quickly to deliver a really good impact and a really good positive outcomes from it, and others, with they are material and are significant, will have to be done at a slower rate through the LTP process.
Thank you, Councillor Cashmore. Councillor Dalton, I'm thinking about our mana whenua, our matawaka, our Maori whānau, and there's a question here, or it's a comment question. Is it important to councillors to support an equity-based approach to cutting costs so that people in poorer areas are better supported than those in the higher decile areas and services preserved? Or again, is this a whole, does this go back to the submissions process and why it highlights why it's important to hear back from them? Councillor Dalton, some comments from you, please.
It's really important to hear from our suburbs, particularly in the south. We historically haven't gotten a large amount of submissions from them, and as councillors, to be able to really push home with our colleagues what the south needs, it helps when we hear back from our constituents, anyone who's living in our suburbs out there. Equity has been really difficult to find since we came into the super city, actually, Eddie, and we still try to fight that battle. And we'll get there eventually, but we still see it across the region. It's really important that not one area of Auckland misses out more than the other. And I think we've heard many times how the CBD is gold-plated and all we see is a lot of investment in the city and not much out south. And I think it's a feeling that's shared in other parts of the region, but of course we're interested in the south here tonight. And, you know, we feel it, we see it, we want to make sure that the south doesn't suffer, but actually this is an emergency budget. And I saw a comment before about moving money from one area to another area. There's no money to move. So everything in this emergency budget proposal is a proposal. And then we have to decide what it is that stays and what gets deferred. And as Councillor Cashmore, we're talking about deferrals, not it's never going to happen again. So what can we live with for the next year? What can we live with as a compromise? And what we've heard from our local board chairs who we've been working alongside is don't touch our pools and don't touch our libraries and don't touch our community centres because we need them to be together. If those are the things that are important, we need to hear it from our people. So I encourage everyone just to go online and just drop us a line. It doesn't need to be a lot of words. It just needs to be about what's important to you. Thanks, Eddie.
Thank you, Councillor Dalton. Before I go to Councillor Filipaina for a comment, Councillor Dalton, I just wanted to flesh out a comment that you made, and the comment was, there is no money to move around. The more I go on my social media and I have a look at the dialogue around people engaging about the emergency budget consultation, there just kind of seems to be an understanding that because Council's got a large sort of spreadsheet, so to speak, that in fact there is an ability for us to just move stuff from one project and redirect it into another. I don't know if that's it's a valid question, but it's what I'm hearing a lot of, Councillor.
I think because we talk about so many millions and billions of dollars that it might look a bit that way. But what we have done as a council is asked our council-controlled organisations to do the same thing. Go away, find some savings, come back and tell us what you're not going to do. And they did that. And then we said, go away again and do it again, because we need you to not spend quite so much money. Unfortunately, an outcome for this is going to be deferrals of projects, but it's also going to be job losses. And there's a lot of talk around salaries and too many people working at council. it's an organisation that needs to have good people working for it to deliver on the outcomes for Auckland as a whole and our suburbs as well. And this is going to be a very sad and very difficult time for many people, as they can read themselves, people that work here at Council can read themselves in the document that this is going to be a very sad and difficult time. So there is no money to move from one pot to another. We can't even, it's like shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic, isn't it? So we just need to make some hard calls now on what we do for the next year.
Councillor Dalton. I'm going to move across now to Councillor Filipino and then Councillor Bartley. But before I do, our subject matter experts, I wonder if we could see if we've got an update. Thinking about council savings and the voluntary sort of salary reductions and things, we did have a response to that last week. I wondered if we do have an update tonight. Councillor Filipino.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. Look, I just really wanted to comment and sort of flow on from Councillor Dalton, and that is around Maori and really for them to have a say. Both Councillor Dalton and I were on a Facebook interview with Radio Wātea, and it was important that there was about I think we had a few thousand of our community have their say, but only 5% of that. I think the figure was around 15,000, I think recall. But you know, that just gives you an indication as to our community, especially our ethnic community, Maori, obviously Pacific. But that's how much we had for Maori, was 5% out of that, 8,000, sorry, was 8,000 submissions, 5%. So it's just so important for them, as in our community, but Māori to have a say. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Filipino. Councillor Bartley.
Oh, thank you, Eddie. I just wanted to follow up regarding the comments about shifting money around. I was the same. I thought, oh, surely you can take some money out of those projects and put it to projects that are of greatest need. But apparently, you know, I mean, it doesn't actually work like that, because the money that is tied to certain projects is usually around capital, and that money is borrowed for that particular purpose or received from the government for that particular purpose to build that particular thing or that particular project, and you can't really change it from that to put it into a community service or something like that, which is seen as operational. So it's not as simple as just cutting from here and applying it to over here, because some projects are already underway, and if you did that, you would also lose a lot of money in penalties, which again, people wouldn't want to see us lose money in that way. And if you did move away from certain, you know, infrastructure or building projects, that's jobs that are also affected. So you've got to look at the whole picture of something that you're wanting us to cut. So I thought I'd just offer that up as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bartley. Councillor Cashmore, you might notice bottom left of your screen, there's a fairly lengthy or comprehensive question there about the Tupuna Maunga Authority. Now, I guess, might it be appropriate to sort of pose this contribution as, is the Tupuna Maunga Authority being asked to make the same considerations that Council has asked the CCOs, and also that Council has asked of itself to make in response to the financial crisis?
Thanks, Eddie. And the short answer is yes. In fact, we didn't have to ask. It was volunteered by the chair of the Tupuna Maunga Authority, Paul Jury. And when you look at the Maunga Authority, it is a result of a treaty claim. And the decision of how the Maunga are managed now is in the hands of the Tupuna Maunga Authority. And I had the privilege working with them in my first term as an elected councillor, and I learnt a lot from the engagement with the members on that authority. And you'd have to say that our volcanic cones were largely ignored and not well funded for maintenance or improvements by the legacy councils. And the authority has actually brought a fresh focus, a fresh enlivenment of participation in public awareness and public going to the Monga, to the volcanic cones. And by and large, the response has been really positive. So there has been an increasing budget for improved capital and an OPEX operational budget for the Te Puna Monga. But they have understood, and I just take my hat off to them, said, we understand the need for constraint in this particular budget. We understand what COVID has done to the council's potential to do things. So we will voluntarily cut our budgets, and those figures will be coming back to us in the next week or two. So you're good on them. In fact, I would say, Eddie, right across the board, we have seen Auckland Transport, we have seen RFA, we have seen all the CCOs, an 25% reduction. We have seen them all come to the party, put their shoulder to the wheel, still want to deliver for Auckland, but they're understanding the constraints, and they're all participating extremely well as a group to help deliver for Aucklanders as best we can in these challenging times.
Thank you, Councillor. Before I give the opportunity to Councillor Filipina, Councillor Cashmore, I wondered if you could refresh my memory, because there's a question here around, a lot of our leaders, both in the public and the private sector, have taken pay cuts and have volunteered these up. Have our councillors considered doing something similar, or where are we at on that?
Yes, thanks, Eddie. So the Mayor and I both announced very early on in COVID that we would take 20% off our salaries. And right at this moment, the Remuneration Authority is going to be delivering, because the council salaries, politicians' salaries are set by an outfit called the Remuneration Authority, chaired by Fran Wild. And they look at what is a fair and reasonable salary compared to the work that councillors do. And there's a whole bunch of formulas around that sort of stuff. So each year they come out with a recommendation. Right at the moment, they are looking at, okay, what sort of reductions are going to be put in right across New Zealand for councillors, and it's going to be, looks like it's going to be done in pay scale. So for those over 100,000, we'll probably have whatever, let's say it's 10 or 15 or 20%. For those under 100, might be a bit less, and those under 50, probably not so much at all. So it's going to be on a graduated scale. We just don't know what that is at the moment. It is virtually impossible for councillors to turn down their salary or apportionment of that under the Act. And to give that back to council is really, really hard. You have to do it through a donation way. So this piece of work being done by the Remuneration Authority now will actually reset the salaries, and then we'll have to look at the timeframes and what anything else that we as individuals want to do back. Not everyone can. Some people, same with our staff. Some people have commitments. They have families. Or they have disbursements of their own to help whānau or family members elsewhere. So each individual circumstance has to be treated individually, but the commitments have been made. All of our ELT have voluntarily taken quite big cuts, and we've seen our staff are really, I think well over half of them have volunteered to give up some salary, which is commendable. I think everyone's doing their bit, what they can, when and how they can.
Karawe, kia ora, Councillor Cashmore. Councillor Filipina.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I just wanted to reinforce what Bill has said, but just wanted again around the Tupuna Monga, and as the current Deputy Chair with our co-governance model between Tupuna Monga Authority and Auckland Council, that the legislation puts this co-governance model in place. And in 2014, that was the Ngā Mana Whenua o Tāmaki Makaurau collective redress deed, which was passed into law. So, we've just gone out with the Tupuna Monga Authority operational plan. And, for me, again, I just want to acknowledge the people who had a say in regards to the consultation with that. But, I just look forward to us as a community moving forward around our tupuna maunga that we have. Thank you.
Whaftai, Councillor Filipina. There's a question here around youth engagement. So you'll forgive me for assuming that this question is directed to Councillor Collins. It's a question around youth. Although all our panellists are quite youthful this evening. Councillor Collins, youth engagement and the support of youth sport and activities are very important to support their mental well-being. Is this at stake? both at the sort of regional level and sort of more at the localized level? My apologies, Councillor Collins. It might be my fault on my end, but if you'd like to try again.
I beg your pardon, I forgot to turn on the mic. I think there'll be, as wide-ranging as this discussion has been, there's going to be challenges, and youth are going to be a grouping that is going to be challenged, and even if people have been watching, this may have been something that came from the discussion that was had at your committee meeting, Councillor Filipina, just yesterday or the day before, around youth centres. And so there are challenges. We don't have the same amount of money. We can't just move money. That discussion has been had. And so I think the councillors in this room, most of us around the table, accept that the well-being of our young people is pivotal to the way in which they fulfil their life potential, their sporting, their athletic and educational potential. And so what we need to be doing is getting a good gauge of what the community wants and how we then elicit those resources throughout what we have. So all of us are keen to see young people engaged, participating. We know that Auckland has a very young population, a population that's very youthful. We have an I Am Auckland plan that I've already talked about. There are parts of that plan that have been implemented, and there's desires to implement even further, but some of those implementation steps will be halted or be paused, granted the level of income that we're going to have. So yeah, you can take it from us that we're definitely keen on seeing young people do really well, excel and fulfill their potential, and we understand that their mental well-being is pivotal to them being able to excel in society. What we have to take from people's feedback is how we then distribute the resource that we have. What are the competing interests? And I think that's going to be an issue that is high on the radar of many of our councillors, as will a number of other competing interests.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. Scott, thank you for your question this evening. Because we've sort of touched on it earlier in the webinar tonight, I hope you don't mind me rephrasing your question. The question is, though, for your information, viewers and listeners, is what will Otara lose in this budget, please? Now, of course, there's nothing in, there's nothing out. It's really open to the submissions and the recommendations that you make. But if I may rephrase and redirect that question, Scott, to our councillors Filipina and Collins. Councillors Collins and Filipina, what might Otara lose in this budget if the people of Otara don't make a submission and tell you what's important to them? Is that a fair question? And I'll start with you, Councillor Collins.
Thanks, and hey Scott, good to see you online, or see that you're tuned in. Look, as we already know, the big challenges are around our services. The possible reduction of services could be library hours. We know that the pools, the people of Otara and Manukau, both local board areas in Manukau, and that's Otara Papatoetoe and Mangere Otahu, pay a targeted rate for their pools. So they pay that targeted rate on top of their rates to keep their pool access free and open. So whilst that targeted rate is in there, it's a lot of the service levels that may be reduced, and we don't know what that's going to look like, but we've got Tupu Library, Otara Library, Papatoetoe. There's a number of libraries out there, and a number of our libraries are youth focused as well. So those are the kinds of things that are up for discussion here. And just while I'm here, this doesn't relate to the emergency budget, but I want to congratulate the people of Otara who are tuned in now, because we stopped the KFC going ahead.
Malolo Faftai, Councillor Collins. Councillor Filipina. My apologies, Councillor Filipina. I think my fat fingers have double clicked something. If you'd like to try again.
Thank you for muting me, Eddie. Thanks a lot. But I'm back online now. Look, I just wanted to add from Whanana was that the parks, that's another one. You've got our rec centres, you've got our pools, you've got our community facilities. You need to have a say in regards to everything. I know that earlier we had mention around some of the capital projects in Manukau. So that's another one. We've there's also a mention of what would end up happening around the Manukau Memorial there. So that's really the cemetery out there. So look, please just put a submission in. Thank you.
Whaftai, Councillor. Councillor Bartley.
Oh, thank you, Eddie. I don't represent Otara, but I got a lot of family that live there. And I'm here because part of my ward, there is a little part of my ward that is in South Auckland, which is the Otahu area. But I wanted to add the other thing that Otara could lose is whatever the Otara Papatoi local board is supporting through their fund, which Councillor Dalton mentioned. Now, the local board can really get in and support a lot of community groups. And so that is at risk with this budget. If people are submitting on a 2.5% increase instead of a 3.5% increase, then that means the local board will lose about 20% of their local discretionary fund. Well, they'll lose a big chunk of what they give out to communities. So it's even more important that our community groups that receive funding from the local board submit in support of the whatever rates increase. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say, but if you want to keep the local board funding at a high level, then support the 3.5% or more. But shout out to Sister Lotu Fuli for all her work as the chair of the Otara Papatoi local board.
I sort of pose this question. I want to press you on this, and I think, if this isn't the appropriate forum to have that conversation, then where is the forum? And so I invite you to keep going. I think, I notice that you, like me, are a prolific social media user, and these are the things that our people are talking about. And I'm not quite sure that the message is getting out there in terms of what's at stake. A, if our people don't participate, get out there and make a submission, and B, if they don't actually tell us the things that they want to support and that are non-negotiable. So I guess this is me just saying it's absolutely fine, and whether you'd like another opportunity to plug it while our community is tuning in.
Well, the other thing is anybody who's a cleaner that's contracted to council, if they want to be paid the living wage, then they also need to submit on this, because that is in jeopardy as well, even with the 3.5% pay increase, rates increase. So, hopefully it goes through. It really comes down to the councillors, but that is also at risk. So if anybody out there is a cleaner that is contracted to council, there's another reason why you need to submit. So like I said before, it affects you day to day. It affects your daily life. It affects our daily life, which is why we're here on a Sunday.
I see I've really struck a chord with the councillors that are sitting opposite me, so I'm going to give you all an opportunity to weigh in on this. Councillor Collins, there's a comment here from Swans, and it says, woohoo, awesome, Councillor Collins. So look, Councillor, your people are listening, they're tuning in. And I wondered, I can't stress the importance of our people getting out there to make a submission and have their say. 30 seconds, Councillor Collins. Again, why is it important? And the reason I'm posing this question again and giving another opportunity to plug it is, for some of our people to get out and make a submission, it's behaviour change. And if we think about voter turnout and those sorts of things, it's difficult to make that shift. So, Councillor Collins, why is it important for our people to turn out?
Yeah, thanks, Tato, and hey, Swanee. Look, just before I answer the question, I think we should go back to where some of the genesis of this. Last year, we consulted on this budget. Yeah, we understand it's an emergency budget, but we agreed as a council that we were going out with a 3.5% increase. And so I think it's important that we have that stated up front so that people don't think we're trying to sneak in a few ideas, which is what I've heard has been suggested in other discussions. We've now come back to consult on whether we should keep the 3.5% that we agreed to in the first place, which was decided on and voted on last year, or because understanding that people are going to be in some hardship, do we pull it back either to 2.5% or whatever else other people would be keen on. My position is that I want to maintain the decision, continue to advance a decision we made last year, which is 3.5%. I understand we've already had a small discussion around the notion of equity, and what we've always known in Manukau, for the ward of Manukau, is that our people have always paid up. They have always paid their share of rates, and they even pay an increase through the targeted rate so that they can have free access to their pools. So our people, who are the poorest people in the city, and we know that, our people are prepared to pay up. And I think it's important that as they hear these messages, by them saying that we want 3.5%, the clear message from them is interpreted as we don't want these services cut. We want the living wage. We want all of these key services that are about how we form a community and build a strong and resilient community, which is all the more reason for people to make contributions to this engagement process, because the more we hear back from people, the more we're able to really affirm their decisions. And just finally, we know that in poorer communities we have the lowest level of voter turnout, so the more we're able to engage, the more we're able to consult our communities, the more we're able to get really clear guidance from them. So I'm really hopeful that people will participate. And look, one of the things I've been saying through our churches is, you might be mum or dad or grandma and grandpa, it's okay to ask the young ones who are at high school or at university and polytech. They can jump online on your behalf and they can ask you the questions, and you can just give them the answers and they can input it for you. So there's ways to do it where people don't feel like English is such a barrier. We've already got some of the languages that people can speak, and that's offered, but it's important as well that the family come together and they can do it as a family group, similar to how we fill out census forms. And I'm bringing up probably bad history for New Zealand, but that kind of thing helps people to feel like they can engage in the process.
Whafte, Councillor Collins. Before I come to Councillor Filipino, I just want to address a question that's been posed here, or a comment. Not everyone has a computer to make a submission, and that's absolutely true. How will Council address the digital divide in this context? The first thing I'll say is that it is quite unusual times. Normally we'd be out there in your town halls, out at the churches, out at the markets doing our thing, but you know, the COVID situation has prevented that rather. However, you are able to give your feedback over the phone until this Friday. Please dial 0930100101. Call our contact centre to make an appointment. Someone will be in touch, or you can go to your local library or service centre and request a hard copy form. If any of that is forgotten, look, at the end of the day, I know that every single elected member on this call is a man or a woman or a servant of the people. Go on the Auckland Council website, find their email address, flick them an email, flick them a text, flick them a phone call, and they'll put you in touch with our team who are charged with this responsibility. And if you're not okay with that, elected members, I will see you offline after the webinar. I want to give Councillor Filipino an opportunity now. Councillor Filipino.
Look, I really just wanted to reinforce what Councillor Dalton said earlier, which is we will be reading the submissions. For me, it's reading what the community has put in there, whether it's 3.5, 2.5. We all know what the situation is and the hole that we're in, depending on the choice that they put through. So I just look forward to reading them when the submission period finishes on the 19th of June. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Filipina. Just looking at our subject matter experts, if there might be a comment that you wanted to make at this time, or will be good. Are there any questions that are unanswered at this time? Cool. We're shortly going to embark on our final stretch of the webinar, and I'm just looking around the room also to some of our councillors if there are any comments or any reflections that you want to make before I move the segment along. Thank you. What I might do now is begin to go around the room and ask for final reflections from our members this evening. Before I do, though, I do see a comment here, and like I said, it is a South Auckland focused webinar, but questions, comments, concerns from sort of any aspect really of council or the community are fine. the question here, and I might start with Councillor Cashmore, the figure of 40 million less transport fares is mentioned. I was on 2 buses on Friday and 8 people boarded offering cash. Drivers no longer accept cash. Nevertheless, they were able to board the bus. Why are Council and South Auckland local boards not doing more to encourage residents? Actually, beg your pardon, Councillor Cashmore, I'll redirect this to Councillor Collins. Why are South Auckland boards and Auckland Council not doing more to encourage residents to get AT hop cards?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think it's important to know both the Otara Papatoetoe and Mangere Otahu local boards in the last 4 years have undertaken campaigns of their own to give out free hop cards, and that went over a period of a couple of weeks, and it's happened twice, I know, in the Mangere Otahu local board area. So we've worked alongside Auckland Transport to make sure that people are aware that you need an AT hop card. There were challenges we had as well with senior citizens and how the hop card would work, needing a hop card and their card at the time. So the local boards, who we've been working with, have made a number of efforts to ensure that communities have access to a hop card. We know that it's the kind of technology that is new for people. You have to put money on it. So we knew that those were some of the challenges that people have, which is why the local boards wanted to take away that particular hurdle, offer it free, and then people just needed to top up their card with, I think the minimum is $10 or something like that. So there have been some efforts. If it means that we've got to try again, then that's something we'll definitely need to be looking into. But it would be remiss of me to say it hasn't been tried, and over the years we have tried to make sure that people, our communities, completely understand what you need to be able to get on the bus and the train.
Thank you, Councillor Collins. Councillor Cashmore, it's the $1 million question, and it's been asked time and time again, but seeing that this is obviously a different audience, have we done everything that we can? Have we considered all our options? Have we talked to central government? Have we paused all the things that we can pause? Have we actually left no stone unturned? Councillor Cashmore.
Yes, thanks, Eddie, and a very important question. Yeah, we have turned the whole riverbed upside down, looking for these savings and these deferrals. Have we approached the government? Yes, we have. We've seen the UP program that the government came in, and Auckland got over $3 billion worth of infrastructure. There is a shovel-ready project that the government's put forward, which will be announced in July, August. And I understand from the Finance Minister there's going to be waves of more financial help in the way of infrastructure projects, whether it's new hospitals, schools, roading, rail, whatever, things that are government funded coming forward. So yes, we have turned over a lot of stones. One comment that has been made quite a lot is that people say, why don't you just borrow more money? And as our financial guru Andrew said earlier, council has limitations. So I think one of the critical points that people need to understand is council's debt is financed from revenue. So council has around a $4 billion revenue stream a year, thereabouts. And we have around $50 billion worth of assets. But those are roads, those are bridges, those are pipes in the ground. They're not things that you can readily sell. They're playgrounds, they're community facilities, they're libraries, they're pools. Although they have a value and they have to be replaced, which is why you fund depreciation, you can't readily sell them. So council's revenue streams actually enable us to borrow money. And that's why we have that 270% ratio, debt to revenue ratio. Very critical point. If we breach that, there are penalties to pay. There potentially would be higher interest rates. And if we had a 3-point drop from our AA credit rating, we'd be up for $50 million a year in extra interest bills. Worse than that, Eddie, is the fact that money would be harder to find. And with the money, when it gets harder to find, the term that you can borrow it for shortens down. So there's a whole section of other costs that come through that would have detrimental effects to what we can actually spend to our communities. So that's one point. We've looked very hard. Yes, we are going to breach the 270 to up to 290 for 1 year, and then we come back in, and the banks, Standard & Poor's, have said we are relaxed around that. We don't like it, but we are relaxed because we know that you have a managed return to within your covenanted ratios. So we've checked with the government, we've checked with the banks, we're looking at our community and saying, what can we do to keep ourselves still in the game? So we need to be able to mow the lawns, clean the pools, do what we can for maintenance of the buildings, repair roads, still have a capital program to keep capability and capacity within Auckland, and still be able to partner with the government in a meaningful way in capital projects. The ministers have made it very clear, any council that slashes and burns its budgets completely cannot expect to have help from the government. And that's probably a fair comment. We need to partner up. You bear in mind, when you step outside your front door, you land on the footpath. That's a council asset that's been built from ratepayers and council's assets. You get on a bus that's partially subsidised by the government, but it's also 50% funded by council. You use a ferry, you use a landing station where ferries go. You catch a train. The train you catch is funded by council. You use the pools, you use the parks, you turn on a tap and clean, drinkable water comes out. You go to a regional park, you might go to a boat ramp, take your grandkids to a playground. These are all things that council supplies, and the list goes on and on. And council does that with 7% of the tax take on a national scale. 7%. And I think it's a very important point that people need to think about, is that our finances are limited. We operate in a constrained environment fiscally. Governments have a greater degree of flexibility, and they also have 93% of the tax take. That's not making excuses either which way. That's just the reality in which councillors Alf and Angela and Efeso and Josephine and I have to work in. And it makes things really difficult. Do we like to cut projects? Do that to say, oh, we're not going to mow that park quite as often, or we're not going to repaint that hall, or we're not going to replace that playground for a year. It's going to be deferred for a year. Do we like doing that? Heck no. But these are times that we've not seen before. And we have to actually make some really, really hard calls. The other point, the last point I'd like to make, Eddie, is there's been some talk around some circles, particularly on social media, around a zero rates option. And it is canvassed in our summary version, but it's canvassed in a bit more detail in the more detailed briefing documents. And for the people who are listening in, a zero rates strike would actually mean there would not be a capital program of any significance whatsoever. The cuts to the services that our communities love and enjoy would be severe. You would see wholesale library and pool closures. You would see parks that would probably become meadows. There would be no maintenance in regional parks, and our key infrastructure, both piping and roading, would have detrimental impacts upon the quality of what they could deliver. That is the reality of a zero, which is why we didn't put it up as an option, because we recognised pretty early on, although we checked it and had a good look at it, we realised that it was not viable for the community, which is why we put up 2.5 and 3.5. And we will listen to the fantastic feedback that we're getting in record numbers from these webinars. You know, what are we up to now? 17,000? We've got another 5-6 days to go. We could get to 20,000, which was never heard of before, which is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic for Aucklanders to submit in these numbers is great. And we will read and look at every submission. They all get put into topic lines, and we look at them all, and we'll make some calls. People might not get everything they want, but the calls that we have to make will be the ones that are prudent, rational, but still retain as much capacity and capability as we can in the realms of prudence and financial fiscal management. Thanks.
Some great insights and a fantastic way to bring this dialogue towards the end, Councillor Cashmore. So as always, thank you so much for your wisdom and your contributions to our webinars. Andrew Duncan, I have a comment from you, please.
I think Bill summed up the overall picture really well. There's some tough choices to be made by the councillors about how we manage the major reduction in our non-rates revenue. And then there's the questions around the level of rates increase. I'll also finish by answering a question that's just popped up. Someone's asked whether we're going to do a revaluation of all the properties across the city next year. We're scheduled to do that. The council has to decide whether it will do that or not. The government's allowed us, all councils, to request that the revaluation be put off. Council hasn't decided to do that yet, but there's some pretty good reasons why we might want to. It's not clear that the economic effects of COVID-19 will be clear for the property market in a couple of months' time when we do a revaluation. So it may well be wise to put that off for a year. I'd also note that revaluations don't mean that your rates will go up. We only use the property values to share the rates out across the city. So if your value goes up by the average, then it doesn't affect your rates. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. To our viewers and listeners this evening, we've come up towards the 90-minute mark now, so what I'm going to do is just go around our panel and ask our elected members for some final reflections before we wrap up this evening. And I'll start with you, Councillor Delton, please.
Thank you, Eddie. And Councillor Cashmore did an excellent job of summarising. I think what I would just say to everyone is that a 3.5 rate increase doesn't fill the $525 million that's missing. It's still going to be tough. It's still going to be really hard. And so please expect to see that there will be changes in our communities, regardless of the rate increase. It just depends what one is chosen. And in the documentation, it's quite clear that at 2.5, things are more than grim. They're pretty grim at 3.5. So I just want everyone to be prepared that 3.5 doesn't solve our problem. We're still going to have experiencing cuts and missing events and missing services. So thanks for the opportunity, Eddie. I've really enjoyed it.
Ka mo te wehi. Thank you so much, Councillor Delton. Councillor Collins, whatnana, final reflections from you, whatman moli.
You just want to thank people for their questions, for the level of engagement we're seeing. The Deputy Mayor summed up the fact that we're seeing huge pieces of information come back to us, which is a sign of the success of this engagement process. So I'm glad that we are getting to the ears and the hearts of Aucklanders, and it's important that people feel like they can contribute. Just want to say thanks for the opportunity. I think it's important people know that we're still available. We can still be contacted via email or by phone if there are particular questions related to our areas that we represent that people have. But this has been a really good forum. Thank you.
After whatnana, Councillor Collins, and yes, indeed, again, congratulations on the win in Otara. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Title, for the opportunity, and just again a message to everyone to thank them for engaging in this process and for putting through their submissions and for getting the word out there to their friends and families about the importance of this budget and why it's important to submit. So yeah, I look forward to reading people's submissions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Bartley, and also thank you, Stephen, for the comment or the message that you've sent through tonight. I know it's really, really hard for anybody to go after Councillor Cashmore because he's such an eloquent speaker, but Councillor Filipaina, you have the final word for this evening.
Didn't push my button. Oh, now it is. Look, Eddie, I just wanted to say thank you to you, to all the people that are here. I'm especially around the table on level 26 and at home helping with this webinar. I really can't say much that's already been said, so I'm going to leave it there because it has been said. But I just wanted to lastly congratulate the New Zealand Warriors and the Auckland Blues, because it's been some time that we've had both teams win in the one weekend. So I just wanted to leave everybody with that. So thank you so much.
Whawhitai tele lava. Thank you, Councillor Filipaina, for your thoughts or your reflections this evening. To our friends and whānau out in South Auckland, I just want to touch on a question that has been raised this evening, and we will indeed circle back with something more extensive in terms of our outreach. But, you know, Te Kaunihera o Tāmaki Makaurau, we're always looking at ways that we can improve our collaboration with our community at the grassroots level, and also diversifying our approach so that it is culturally competent and respective and inclusive and all of the above. But, you know, we won't always get it right, and I do acknowledge that it was a really, really short time frame to turn this around. As the elected members have mentioned, and it's also absolutely the case with all of us here at Te Kaunihera o Tāmaki Makaurau, please reach out. We won't always have the answers, and we look forward to forging, navigating this next 12 months together with you, our community. So thank you so much for tuning in this evening. Ka mau te wehi ngā mihi ki a koutou to our Kai Kaunihera, our councillors, our elected members for your time this evening. Also, our subject matter experts, our team from IT, our community engagement and insights team, and everybody, comms and finance and all, that have helped make this webinar a success. Biggest thank you goes to our community. Pō Māori e tō whāsoi fua.